I know from personal experience it can be tough to transition from a student nurse to a professional nurse. I remember when I started my first job in the emergency room, and I sat there twiddling my thumbs because I still had not successfully gotten an IV in, and I was about to hit the ground running. Little did I know that there was such a thing as nurse residencies, and that's why I'm excited to tell you about HCA Healthcare's nurse residency program. This program supports newly graduating nursing students at the early stages of their careers. HCA Healthcare's year-long nurse residency program helps first-year nurses transition from the classroom to working in the field with confidence. Plus, nursing residents get access to a range of opportunities to learn from specialists in various areas, such as ER, critical care ICU, and surgical services. And there's a variety of other great benefits. Learn more today at careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. Again, that's careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. HCA Healthcare is an equal opportunity employer.
Welcome to the Nurse Leader Network podcast with your host, Chris Racinos. Wherever you're going on your nurse leader journey, we're here to help you get there.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nurse Leader Network. We are sitting here today on February 10th and have somebody who is in our presence that we have been waiting to hear from on the Nurse Leader Network. I'm just going to, without any ado, introduce Dr. Grant. Welcome, Dr. Grant.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Okay, now, Dr. Grant, let's just get to the nitty-gritty. How did you decide to become a nurse, and then what was that path to becoming the president of the ANA?
Oh, you don't waste any time.
No, I don't waste any time. We want to know. We want to know details.
Inquiring minds want to know. Okay. How I got into nursing, as I like to tell people, I originally wanted to go to med school and become an anesthesiologist, but I was one of the youngest of 7 kids in my family, a single-parent household. My father died when I was 5, and we grew up very, very poor. And so even though my guidance counselor said you may be able to get scholarships to go to undergraduate school, but you need to have scholarships to go on through medical school as well. And so he suggested, since you want to go into anesthesia, have you ever thought about being, a nurse anesthetist? Never heard of the word until he had mentioned it. And so we thought about that. And he said, well, one thing you could do is you could go to nursing school, become a nurse anesthetist. And then if you still wanted to go to anesthesia, the medical school, you could work your way through medical school as a nurse anesthetist and, not have, so many bills and things like that to pay for. And he said, well, you may not like nursing. So, they have this 1-year nursing program at the local community college. So why don't you go there, invest that year. And if you like it, you can easily transition to the second year and become, get yourself an associate's degree and then, go from there. Well, it sounded like the ideal thing to do. So about 6 months into my LPN program, I totally forgot all about medical school. Nursing definitely was my calling. And never looked back, So, and then how I aspired to be president of ANA. Of course, I went back and pursued my baccalaureate degree and master's degree. And somewhere along the line with my baccalaureate degree, probably about 2 weeks before I was due to graduate, a dear friend of mine came up to me and said, in her nice little Southern voice, Ernie Grant, she said, Ernie Grant, if you're going to consider yourself to be a professional nurse, then you need to join your professional nursing association. And I said, okay, Ann. And so sure enough, I did. I joined the North Carolina Nurses Association as well as ANA. Next thing I know, I was, on committees and things and being told what a wonderful person I am.
That's always a great feeling.
And, yes. To pump you up. And the next thing I knew, I was, chair of the membership committee, and which was to bring in tons of members, and I was actually very successful with that. And then they wanted me to run for president of NCNA, and I said no. It's I did not see myself as that, but over the years they kept approaching me, and I said no. But sometimes people see leadership skills in you that you don't see yourself. And finally, after, several years, and I do mean several years, they finally, roped me into, or I shouldn't say roped, but
it's roped. We know how it is. We know how it goes.
talked me into, to running for president of NCNA. But prior to that, I had done a lot of work with ANA at the national level as well. I'd been involved on a number of ANA committees and such. And I think probably the very first House of Delegates meeting that I went to, I got the bug and could see myself up there as president, and even told the president at that time, I'm going to be president of ANA one day. Little did I know that it would probably be about a 20-year span before that would happen, but it finally did. So here I am. So
tell me about that day that you got the bug. What about that day was it that, made you decide this is right, this is where I want to go?
I think it was just getting caught up in the moment of realizing that how powerful nursing was and could be, how we are making policies that address the profession, how, you are, sent there as a delegate to represent your colleagues. And as a result of that, you can easily, see that, okay, what we talked about here in my little district of North Carolina and subsequently took to our state nurses association, now seeing this being implemented at the national level. So it just made everything just really crystal clear, and how it all boiled down to essentially, in a way, that one person, and that being the president, who would perhaps take some of those agenda items and go up on Capitol Hill and work, even though we did it ourselves as delegates and et cetera, but it's the president who is going to be there along with our government affairs staff, working a little bit more, sitting down with members of Congress, talking with them about why, it's important that this piece of legislation pass, either, to help benefit nurses or help to generate, benefit the public in general, because, that's one of the things that ANA advocates for, not only on the behalf of nurses, but also for the public's health too. So it just seemed to just crystallize. So I could see myself doing that, and voila.
What's next for you? So you accomplished a ton in your career. You've, really helped prepare troops for deployment with your career in burns. You've been nationally recognized. Are we going to be calling you President Grant in another president term?
Not in that form. I have been I have been approached by some colleagues to consider, when my turn, this is my second turn as president, so it will end December 31st of 2022. And some friends and colleagues have approached me about considering the possibility of running for our state Senate. Right now in North Carolina, we do not have, we have 3 nurses, maybe 4 nurses that are in the North Carolina House, but we have never had a nurse in the North Carolina Senate. We did have one who ran last year. She came pretty close, but unfortunately she was running against an incumbent and lost that race. But it was, it was a good effort and a good try. So I'd like to consider the possibility of that, but we'll see. Right now, we just need to get us out of this crisis that we're in now with COVID, and a few other things that that we're working on, and then we'll see.
I love that you're thinking about that, because could you imagine politics if there were so many nurses in it? That, like, we're the most trusted profession. So could you imagine how politics would flip on its head if the most trusted profession was running politics versus, I'm not going to mention versus what?
Yeah, well, we'd be able to solve a lot of healthcare issues. We'd be able to devote a lot of, address public health, actually put a lot of money into public health. Public health has not had proper funding in over 20 years. And we all know, as COVID is pointing that out, these inequities and things that are happening, we need to address that, because that's what it's going to take to prevent things like this, the pandemic that we're seeing now, and also other huge drivers of healthcare costs, such as, being able to drive down, hypertension, kidney disease, childhood immunizations, things like that. If we can address those, from the public health perspective, with clean water, clean air, clean living environments and things like that, those are things where nurses really excel So yes, if nurses were there, those issues could be addressed and hopefully resolved.
Definitely. I think we could take it from a holistic view and I mean, even go beyond public health, right? Looking at like housing.
Absolutely.
How does getting folks into housing really impact and, decrease the access issues that we have because now you have a place to live or store your insulin. So what would you tell, I mean, you and I it sounds like we have a similar upbringing in terms of being disadvantaged. I grew up here in Los Angeles as a foster kid. I had my daughter when I was 14 and then in my 30s, like went on to become a nurse executive and get a PhD and all these kind of things that you don't typically think of, right? When you look at people from our background. So I know we have listeners right now that are like, well, I'm just a nurse or I'm just somebody who has a background similar to ours. What would you tell them around like what the potential for their, life is?
Well, for me to hear that term, I'm just a nurse, it's like fingers on a chalkboard because you are more than a nurse. You are a change agent is the way I like to think of us because we're the most trusted profession, as you talked about. We are problem solvers. So to me, to just belittle yourself to say that I'm just a nurse, that's not giving, one, you don't have enough confidence in yourself. And number two, you don't have enough confidence in the profession to say, that we are change agents and we're superheroes, because we live in the community. We are a part of the community. What happens in the community affects us and our families just as it affects our neighbors next door. So nurses are looked to for leadership, for guidance, and it takes nurses speaking up and, challenging the situation. And we're also innovators. Show me a nurse who has not thought of a way or what we call a workaround. When something has been like a stumbling block, I cannot think of any nurse who has not said, that's what you think. I'll show you. Because we think of ways to make things work the way they should. And even if it's equipment that we're working with, or if it's a colleague, another member of the healthcare team that we're working with, or if we're advocating on behalf of a patient, we're doing that. So you are more than quote unquote just a nurse. To me, you are a doer, you are a superhero, you are a change agent, and and that's what keeps us moving forward. I also would point out that the future of the profession itself, once COVID is behind us, and can't wait for that to happen. But it has, as I sort of stated earlier, shown the light on a lot of inequities. But it has also shown us some good things, with nursing, such as telehealth, telemedicine, and how the advanced practice nurses are being able to, to have full practice authority and et cetera. People like that. And I served notice to the last Health and Human Services Secretary Azar, and when and have had talks with the the Secretary Designate also about where we would like for the profession to go post-COVID, because we're not going back. The progress that we have made, we need to keep moving forward with that. And one of the ways to address that, I think, is to get the public behind us, for them to understand that they deserve a nurse who can advocate on their behalf. If we're the most trusted profession, then you need to get behind us and fight for us just as much as we're fighting for you, and fight for full practice authorities for, the advanced practice nurse, or even just for the nurse at the bedside. In some states, even nurses with baccalaureate degrees, there's a, sort of a division, if you will, about, their limitations of what they can and can't do, and et cetera. We need to be able to use all the tools and things that we have at hand in order to provide the best possible care for those that we're caring for. So that's where I think that person who says I'm just a nurse, they should realize that they're endowed with superhero
powers,
characters and powers, and being able to change the profession as well as change health and healthcare.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We talked about kind of the future of nursing. It's not going back from, where it was. I'm seeing personally a lot of nurses leave, quote unquote, the profession. Maybe the bedside is the better term for it, and they're beginning their own business. So I'm seeing this explosion of nursing entrepreneurs and nursing innovators, which I think is fantastic. But how do we, we had Hear the Nurse last year, and it's now being extended to this year. How do we as a profession really get the communities involved and behind the work that we're doing? How do we unify our voice to even begin to start that work this year?
I think that starts with, again, nurses being out there. Like right now with the vaccination process that's going on, this is a perfect opportunity for nurses to shine. I have said in other interviews and other writings and things that I've done, nurses need to be at the table. You can't have these, these vaccine, I don't know what I'm missing a word here, but drives, I guess, without consulting a nurse, particularly if it's a public health nurse, because who knows the community best, And so if you're if a nurse is at the table and they say, well, we're going to go hit, this community here. Well, a nurse can say, well, maybe not. There's not a good resource there that, for us to, to do it. Maybe there's not a large parking lot, or there's not a large enough facility, be it at a church or synagogue or, whatever, or school that we can use. Or it's not on a bus line so that people who are in the adjacent community who, may have to, that can't drive or whatever else, how are they going to, to get to us? So maybe we need to rethink this. Maybe we need to move it over a couple of blocks to where we can get those people who can maybe just walk out of their house, walk down the street a little bit or around the block or whatever to get that vaccine, as opposed to, having to, have the vaccine so close, like within a mile or a 3-mile radius, but yet they still can't get there because they can't drive. They have no one who can bring them. There's no public transportation, that's available for them. Little things like that is how we can do that. So, by being at the table, having our voices heard, letting people in the community know, and coordinating with people in the community as well. What are the community resources? Maybe if they are going to have it there, maybe we can get one of the churches to say, okay, well, we'll run our church bus over to the community next door and have a central meeting place so we can get people to, to load up on that, obviously practicing social distancing and et cetera. But still, it's a way to provide the transportation that maybe we saw as a problem before. Now that transportation problem is solved because a nurse thought about, well, the people over there, they don't have that, but I know this church has, several church buses or vans that we can use to, to get those individuals there. So I think that's one way, is to begin to have our voices heard in the community. I think the other one is going to city council meetings or town hall meetings, or, of course, attending them virtually now, but speaking up and having your voice heard, challenging, the people who are making the decisions about the communities where you live, and say, you told us, while you were running for office that you were going to address this, this water problem. Well, the problem still exists. Or you were going to address this food desert problem. The problem still exists. There's no drugstores here for older people to have access to. What are you doing about that? Challenging them, is one good way. And again, I think once people begin to realize that, hey, this person is advocating on our behalf, and what they're saying is actually going to benefit the community that I live in, I'm going to get behind what they're saying and join with them. And hopefully that will be a groundswell. And as a result, we can have a solution to those problems.
Yeah. I've talked to, I don't know if you know Mayor Haney. She's a nurse practitioner. Yeah. So I had her on one of the episodes of my shows, and she really talked about getting people to, different meetings, and really starting even like at, grassroots, local levels.
Absolutely.
And so, I think what I see in a lot of nurses, like as a chief nursing officer, I'd see, I just don't have the time, or I don't have whatever, or there was a lot of like siloing, right? So a lot of perhaps, things that were going on in the community didn't impact my specialty, right? So if I'm an L&D nurse, and you're not talking about, statistics around pediatrics or labor and delivery, it's not something that interests me. How do we get nurses out of our self-imposed silos? We we silo ourselves. And I think that's a huge reason for why our voices are still not unified.
Yeah. Well, you just gave a couple of good examples that I can expound upon, because for that person who's involved in pediatrics, or that person who's a maternal, labor delivery or whatever, again, we already know, statistics are already showing, specifically among Black and brown, mothers, how their maternal health is in danger. They're likely to die, 2 to 4 times more than their white female counterparts, because of the poor health that they may get, either prenatal care and et cetera. If that's not enough to get somebody who is in labor and delivery, fired up to want to do something to change, then I don't know what would be. Same thing with pediatrics. How do we know that that our community is safe from maybe guns? How are we going to get guns off the street, or make sure that the playgrounds where the kids go to play is a safe playground, and not one where if they're sliding down a sliding board, they perhaps tumble down and may sustain an injury. Those are some of the the little simple things that that we can still do as nurses. And you're going to do it as a parent, because you can imagine, what if it's my kids or my grandkids that are utilizing that park? I want to make sure that park is safe. Or if it's kids are going to be riding a bike, how do we know that why can't we challenge the town government to make bike lanes so that kids can ride safely in the bike lanes, pedestrians can walk safely on the street, cars can drive and if necessary put in speed bumps or whatever else, if it's a close enough neighborhood that if you're noticing, speeders and things like that. Those are just simple things. But, as a nurse, what you're doing is preventive maintenance, because you're preventing that child from possibly winding up in your local emergency room with a closed head injury or a broken arm or leg or whatever else as a result of that. And all it takes is just your advocating. So it starts small, and, and even if it's something that perhaps you're unsure of, or maybe you don't want to be really out there, but you specialize in something. So even if it's just volunteering, maybe at the the local PTA, or if it's a congressman or your local state senator or representative, volunteer to serve as their healthcare expert. You can be behind the scenes, but you can also explain to them, if you vote this way on this particular piece of legislation, these are the people this is how it's going to affect the people in the community that you represent, or let's give them the true factual information, because in a lot of cases, their assistants, they get stuff off of Google or Wikipedia or whatever else, they really don't have the healthcare background. So by saying, I want to volunteer to be your healthcare expert, and even though you may not know nothing about whatever particular thing there, we're nurses. We know how to network. We know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody that can, come in and give us a brief synopsis or arrange a meeting with that candidate or whatever, and say, here's the history behind this and this and this, and and your piece of legislation or the legislation that's before you, this is how it's going to help, or this is how it's going to hinder healthcare and the growth within the community. So you can start small, or you can go big. Even signing up for like at ANA, we have the RN action alerts, when there are things that are going on, even just to, we'll send you an email, you fill out your email content and everything else, put in your zip code, it automatically identifies who your elected member of the House is, who your senator is, and bam, that letter has gone off to them. All you did was took 30 seconds to fill in your name, your email, but you may think, oh, well, they're just going to think it's another email. But I will say that last year, when we sent out a particular email alert, we got over 500,000 response. So we got the attention of Congress, because we were actually up for an award because of how many people responded to that particular piece of legislation that was there. So don't tell me that just spending that 30 seconds isn't worth it. It is definitely worth it.
He's preaching over here, folks. So it's time to start.
Yeah, so now we just have to pass the plate.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so for those nurses that are trying to get their seats at the table, What is the best piece of career advice you have ever been given that we could start utilizing?
I think the best piece of advice, one, find yourself not a mentor. I'd find two or three, but definitely people that and say, I'd like to, would you be my mentor or whatever? I have plenty that I go to, over the years. There's one, he's an elderly gentleman. His name is Dr. Gene Tranbarger. Gene is I think he's about 80. I hope you don't mind me telling his age. He's about 87 now. And in my role as president, when I called Gene to let him know that, the first time that I had won the presidency, he said, well, I'm very happy for you, but be careful what you wish for.
He sounds like a wise guy.
And, yeah, he is. He's very wise. And then he's, I've called him before on several other things. And his comments were, well, you already know what you need to do. You're just using me as a sounding board, so that's that's one of the mentors that I know. In other words, he's just confirming for me what I already know that I need to do. And then there are others that I can, bounce things off, and, they'll give me some thoughts and things to think about. So that's the reason I said that you need to have more than one, in my opinion. The other thing is, as nurses, we're already prepared to be leaders. When you're the charge nurse on your unit, what are you doing? You're leading, right? You're assessing the situation. You're making the best decision for your colleague and for the patient that they may be caring for, and presenting that to the rest of the healthcare team and saying, standing up and advocating. That's what leaders do. So it starts there. It also starts when you are on various committees within your facility. And I say hospitals, but it could be long-term care, it could be public health or whatever. But you start right there. And, when you are on, say, a governance committee and you begin to see a problem, but you begin to make recommendations. How can we attack this, or how can we address this particular issue so that it's fair and it's just for everyone all the way around? That's leadership. So that's how you get started. And then, I always tell students, whenever I speak with students, there are 3 nursing organizations you need to join. One is your State Nurses Association. The other one is ANA, which are usually, joint membership. And then the third is your specialty organization. With those 3 memberships there, everything you need to know about the particular specialty in which you practice is covered, and then become active. And notice I used the word active members in those associations.
Oh, not just push the one little button.
Right. It's one thing to have your names on the roll. It's another thing to actively participate. And how do you do that? You do just like I did. You start out by joining committees, being put on committees, and et cetera, and going from there. And the more confidence that you get, the more, if you want to move up, then you continue to do that. It's a great opportunity to network and grow strength that way as well. But that's how I think nurses get a seat at the table. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a healthcare related table either. It could be, like maybe at your church or synagogue. I serve on the COVID task force at my church, in addition to everything else that I'm doing.
Not like you have nothing else to do.
Right. And I couldn't say no to the pastor when he came through. And, so it's myself and I think 3 other people with healthcare backgrounds, that are, because my church has we feed homeless 3 times a day, as well as offer, shelter for them on, white flag nights and et cetera. And they are there to, we offer courses where they can learn how to fill out resumes and things like that. So when COVID hit, there was, all that, sort of had to stop because you couldn't have them confined inside the buildings. But, so they needed guidance. So that's another way, again, to have a seat at the table is to, maybe it's not necessarily healthcare related, like, in your State Nurses Association or whatever else, but it is being at the table at something that has an influence on public health and safety.
Now, you mentioned, I'm going to go back to your mentors, that you have several of them and you recommend several of them. What are your thoughts around, like, if I'm seeking mentors, should I be looking at diversity in mentors? Like, should there be diversity in age, in different professions that they're in? Like, how do you pick a good mentor? Because I know that I've seen folks that I'm like, oh, I'd like to be mentored by them. And I've asked to be mentored by them. And I was like, this isn't exactly what I was looking for. So how do we pick our mentors?
Well,
how'd you pick your mentors?
It's the way, well, well, who would say no to Ernest? Right?
You make me choke on my coffee over here.
Sorry. No, that's a really good question. To me, it should be like an interview at the first, because, I have obviously a number of people who come to me and say, would you be my mentor, and et cetera. And I sort of have to interview them and say, are we compatible? Are you, do you, how do you take advice? Do you, if I'm really going to mentor you, then that means that I shouldn't be the one initiating the, communication and et cetera. It should be you coming to me, keeping me informed of your progress and et cetera. And occasionally I will do it as well. But the whole idea is that it's an investment, and it's an investment that will grow. And yes, I think you do need to have mentors of both sexes. I think you need to have mentors varying in age, in experience, and also inside and outside of your profession. Because again, you never can tell where you're going to wind up, or you may be introduced to someone who may be totally removed from healthcare, but that could be a connection that could get you to where you need to be, either healthcare related, i.e., like if I were to be introduced to my governor, who, I have, but, my governor is an attorney. His background is an attorney, nothing to do with healthcare. But if he had been introduced to me by someone that he trusted or knew, and, maybe he's looking for an appointment on a, healthcare committee or something. So he may go to that person and say, I'm looking to appoint somebody to, I don't know, maybe, the child care task force or something. Do you have anybody in mind? And, and the person that I have mentored or whatever, or that I'm a mentee to, may say, yeah, no, just a person. You remember when I introduced you to, to that Ernest Grant guy, and, the governor may go, it doesn't sound familiar, but, and then he'll say, well, he's that tall, 6 foot, 6.5, it's like, oh, yeah, him. Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, he would be great. And then could name off, your qualifications. Here's why you should consider him. Da 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 da. Next thing you know, you're getting a letter from the governor saying, "Hey, would you be interested in? We're considering appointing you to this committee. Would you be interested in serving?" So that's a good way, or a good example of how having a mix of mentors can help to boost your career, if you will, or your ability to really continue to be a change agent.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think sometimes I've learned so much more from my mentors that are outside of healthcare, because they just give me a different worldview in which to look at problems, right, and solutions. So definitely. Absolutely. Yeah,
because you're looking through it from a different angle. And one of the things I know that we in healthcare, we tend to have blinders on, and we're just seeing it from our perspective. We don't see it from the perspective of, same thing like, take, for example, the language that we use. Nobody understands, except other members of the healthcare team, the foreign language, if you will, that we use, that jargon and writing and such. But you need to have a mentor from the outside to say, speak to me in plain English. What are you saying? And then when we even try to, no, bring it down a little bit more, make it simple, give me just the facts, type thing. It makes you a better individual, a better way to really realize that, hey, I've only got this person's attention for maybe 30 seconds. So how am I going to frame this conversation to really, get my point across and leave a lasting impression and not look like a bumbling idiot, so to speak, after I, was given the opportunity to make a first impression and I fumbled it.
Yeah, I agree. So you gave us the tip on the the piece of advice, what is one habit that you have that you think has contributed to your success? Like what kind of habits should we be picking up? Mine is have like 20 cups of coffee a day, but
I can only do 2 cups. I think probably one of my habits is I'm a very inquisitive person, and it's weird that I say this because I have one of my 2 sisters, the one that's closest to me. I'm the youngest, as I said, of 7. So there's a sister who is 2 years older than I am, and I thought I was inquisitive, but she's worse.
Oh, your poor mother.
No, well, but here's there was a method to my inquisitiveness. In her case, there is not. So I think by my method to being inquisitive is to show people that yes, I am interested in what you're doing. And enlighten me and, let me, sort of think along the same lines that you're thinking or, have that same framework so that, I can see it through your eyes. And am I seeing the correct thing? Or let's sit down and have a dialogue about what I'm seeing versus what you're seeing. And, maybe we can have growth from that. So that's, pretty much what I would say is one of my habits is being very inquisitive.
I love that. Sometimes I have to like remind myself, go into inquisitive mode because when you lead teams, you're frequently like the person that has the answers or that is seeking to get the answers. But sometimes you just like most of the times you just got to sit there and really seek to get others, input and kind of see things from their frame of reference, which is why I think diversity is such a huge piece of being a leader and such a huge piece of healthcare. Speaking about diversity, what are some thoughts that you might have around how we can really begin to not only diversify at like who's sitting at the table? I mean, we talk about who's sitting at the table, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were like examining. I saw this like little pie, and it said it was around the time of the insurrection, and it said that there was, I think, like 90. I'm making it up, but I think it was like 90-something% of politicians were white males over 65 years old, but they only represent, I think it was like 2% of the population or something like that. And so I was, after I saw that, I was thinking about like my own experience as a healthcare executive, and there wasn't many people that looked like me, both in my age or in my color. And so, I mean, when we look at that is a very representative group of who's leading healthcare. And a lot of them are not in nurses, right? We have folks that are not nurses that are leading our practice. What are your thoughts around how we can really change that, dynamic of who's actually leading these organizations and how to get more diverse, both at the local level, but, within communities, on organizations, teams?
Well, Chris, ever since you started asking that question, I've been really aching to just give you the answer there.
Give it to me.
So, and it's sort of going to be a long answer, but work with me and we'll get there. So the first thing, when I speak with students, one of the things that I say, is I'm trying to encourage them to, to join their professional organizations and et cetera. One of my favorite sayings is, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. Okay? Because if you don't have a say-so in how your profession is practiced, just as you were saying, someone far removed from nursing is going to be making those decisions for you. And I'm sorry, but, in order to, one of the definitions of a profession is that you have self-governance, that you have your own body of work, your own body of research, your own body of literature and things like this. So how can it be that as nurses, we sit around and let someone with an MBA make a decision as to how we're going to practice or how many nurses are going to be needed on this particular floor or whatever else? Because what they're seeing, they're looking at the numbers. They're not seeing, the empathy that it may take to stay a little bit longer with Miss Smith because she's afraid. This is her first hospitalization and she's just been told maybe she has cancer or she's got to have surgery or, something like that. And so you got to spend a little bit more time with her as opposed to somebody who's crunching numbers and saying, well, you should only spend, maybe 1.8 hours with this person for your whole 12-hour shift. I'm sorry, but, we got to think, a little better than that and come at that from a different angle. So how do we go about doing that change? I think it starts first in middle school. And the reason I say middle school is that as nurses, all nurses, no matter your ethnic origin, no matter your gender, we need to go in and start talking with those little young kids that are in the 4th and 5th grade or whatever, planting in their minds. And this is something that I do. Another organization that I belong to, we've adopted a local elementary school in the Durham area. And to go in there, now, as I mentioned, I am 6'6", so you can imagine I'm a very imposing person for those little boys and girls. But if they can see that, hey, if this big guy here, if he can be a nurse, then maybe why can't I? Begin to think about it. And in order to be a nurse, you still are taking those, what are the courses called? The STEM courses.
We're both like fumbling over here.
Sorry, I haven't had enough coffee apparently. But you're going to take those STEM courses and things like that, and not everybody's going to be a rocket scientist. Not everybody's going to be a chemist, and et cetera. And to me, to be a nurse, you're doing all that, because I do know nurses who do work with rocket scientists that that help to put the space shuttles to travel in space and things of that sort. So we can get them to start thinking about the profession this way. And then, it goes on to, the entry level into nursing programs. And one of the things that I have when I have conversations with deans of colleges and schools of nursing, I try to tell them, one day as you're walking into your building, stop and think of yourself as a minority walking into your building, and take it from the perspective that a minority would have. Look around. How many minority faculties do you see? What are their ranks? Are they just instructors? Or are they assistant or associate professors? Are they full professors? Do they hold an endowed chair? What kind of pictures do I see on the wall of your alumni or whatever else? Is it creating an opening and welcoming atmosphere? Or are you telling me you don't belong here, in a very subtle language? And what are you doing to specifically recruit more minorities into your nursing program? That says a lot to me, that way. If you're not doing that, then what you're telling me, if I'm a prospective student and I'm walking through your halls and I don't see someone who looks like me within, say, the first 5 minutes or so, you've just told me, you're not welcome here. We want your money, but you're not welcome here. And also, what do you have in place to keep me there? In other words, if I'm going to struggle, do you have something in place that you don't want to see me fail? Are you do you have in place something that maybe will help me? Maybe I don't have the latest laptop, or maybe I don't have the World Wide Web at home. I may have to go down the street to study at the library, which is going to close at 10 or something like that.
Or not even open because of the pandemic.
Yeah, may not even be open. Yeah. So maybe, looking at that and say, oh, well, we can provide you with this little hotspot, where you could still get, have access to the internet and, connect to things and et cetera. So that says a lot there as well. The other thing when it comes to employment, to the employer, do you mostly hire nursing students from one particular program that may not have a, diverse or diversified class? Or do you hire from all over? Do you only hire baccalaureate nurses, or do you hire, a good mix of diploma, baccalaureate, and associate degree nurses? When there are times for potential for promotion, do you specifically, look for a minority, or do you hold them back by saying, well, this person only has an associate degree, so we only want people with a baccalaureate degree or higher, instead of saying, yeah, you fit the mold. I know you only have an associate degree, but if you promise me you'll start working on your baccalaureate, in a certain amount of time, and we'll help you to get there, then, I'm going to take a chance on you. And also, offering, what about the potential for, chief nursing officers to, to spot potential leaders who may be minorities and, have like a leadership academy within your own organization, to bring that individual along so that you're doing succession planning, because you've already got somebody who is endeared to the organization. And maybe sometimes, yes, it is good to bring somebody out from the outside in to, to help promote change. But, if not necessary, then grow your own leadership. And, that person is going to be so loyal to the organization because they're going to say, these people have invested in me. And, so when it is time for me to move on up the ladder, I'm going to do that. But then also I'm going to reach back and, bring those behind me as well. So, that's sort of a, beginning start of that. But I said it was going to be a long answer. So
it wasn't that long, but you just brought up some great points, and you made me actually think when you said, my hospital, I started us on a magnet journey back when I first started there. And we were moving from not hiring associate's degree nurses and just hiring bachelors, right? Because we wanted to become magnet. And so I'm now wondering, like, what is the impact of leaders who are trying to go for magnet in terms of who they're recruiting? Because you're right, a lot of, especially in Los Angeles, a lot of nurses, there's still a lot of ADN programs here. And how different are the graduates in terms of diversity from an ADN program from a BSN? So that's a huge point, I think, for leaders that are listening to really reflect on, because we could be shooting ourselves in the foot around diversity if we're... Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the things that that's been put in place in a lot of things is that, we'll hire, associates, but it's with the understanding that within, 18 months, you've got to start working on your baccalaureate degree. And I don't know, out there in California, but I know here, the particular hospital that I worked at and retired from, they did the same thing, but they also, it was a state institution. So you're being a state employee, you were allowed to take X amount of, you could take 6 hours of classes, tuition free. So you either, if it wasn't one of the state schools, if you were doing an online course or whatever else, you had to pay the money up front, pass the course, but you got your tuition, reimbursed. Or the hospital also offered, on-site classes for you to be able to obtain your baccalaureate degree. So really, there was no excuse for anyone, with a diploma, because there's it's soon to be changing to a baccalaureate program, but we have one of the oldest diploma programs, near here as well. So there was absolutely no excuse for you not to, if you wanted to progress, the opportunity was there for you to do that. And that's one of the ways too that, when they qualified or requalified for magnet, that's how they would meet that designation as well, is to say, we have a career advancement program for, the associate degree nurses that we do hire. And it's with they are hired with the understanding that within 18 months, they should be working on their baccalaureate degree, or, we'd have to have a little talk.
Yeah. I know here in California, most hospitals do have that reimbursement, or they'll even pay for them to take time off. But most hospitals also that are in magnet, that is the lowest bar. You can't even, if you apply without a bachelor's, you're not even going to get an interview. So it's kind of like a closed door. So we probably need to revisit some of those policies. Well, listen, Dr. Grant, I could talk to you forever and ever. This has been a fantastic meeting. I'm so glad we were able to connect and pull some pearls and wisdom from you for all of the listeners. I just want to say thank you so much to you, and thanks to all the listeners for Nurse Leader Network. This has been fantastic. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I totally enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully maybe I'll be invited back to continue this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks.
Thanks. Are we off air?